The regulars at Mabel's diner always wondered why Earl kept such perfect timing, why his movements in the kitchen looked more like choreography than cooking, why he never seemed startled by loud noises, and why sometimes, late at night, they could see him practicing what looked like fighting moves behind the diner. None of them guessed the truth until 12 Hell's Angels made the worst decision of their criminal careers. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden strength and quiet courage, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe these untold stories of everyday heroes deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one making your breakfast. Millfield, population 847, was the kind of small town where everybody knew everybody and nothing much happened except maybe a fender bender on Main Street or Mrs. Henderson getting her cat stuck in a tree again. The biggest excitement most folks saw was Friday night football games and the annual Harvest Festival. Mabel's Diner sat right in the heart of downtown, a classic 1950s establishment with red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a long counter where the coffee was always fresh and the pie was always homemade. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped for a real meal, farmers gathered before dawn to talk weather, and locals came for gossip disguised as breakfast. Earl Thompson had been working the kitchen at Mabel's for 15 years, ever since he drifted into town one autumn morning, looking for work and a place to disappear. Mabel herself, an 80-year-old woman who still counted the till every night, had hired him on the spot, not because of his resume, which was thin, but because of something in his eyes that said he understood hard work and wouldn't cause trouble. Earl was maybe 55 years old, average height with graying hair that he kept short and hands that showed the calluses of someone who had worked with them his whole life. He wore the same white apron every day, arrived at 5 a.m. to prep for the breakfast rush, and left after closing without much conversation with anyone. The townspeople had grown comfortable with Earl over the years. He made perfect eggs, cooked bacon exactly how you ordered it, and never got an order wrong. But there were things about him that didn't quite add up if you paid attention. His movements in the kitchen were too precise, too efficient, like he had been trained to waste no motion, no energy. He could flip 6 pancakes simultaneously, crack eggs one-handed, and keep track of 8 different orders without writing anything down. But it was more than that. The way he moved looked almost military. Earl never flinched when pans crashed to the floor, never seemed startled by sudden loud noises, and had reflexes that seemed too fast for a small-town cook. When Jenny the waitress accidentally dropped a tray of dishes behind him, Earl spun around and caught 3 plates before they hit the ground, with moves that looked like something from an action movie. The late shift workers sometimes saw him behind the diner after closing, practicing what looked like fighting techniques, slow, precise movements that resembled martial arts or combat training. They figured maybe he had taken some self-defense classes or watched too many kung fu movies. Nobody asked questions in a small town like Millfield. You respected people's privacy. Let them have their secrets as long as they did their job and didn't cause problems. Earl Thompson did excellent work kept to himself and had become as much a part of Mabel's as the coffee pot and the cash register. Until the day 12 Hell's Angels decided to visit Millfield. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when the rumble of motorcycle engines first echoed down Main Street, loud enough to rattle windows and wake up half the town. The sound grew closer until 12 Harley-Davidsons pulled up in front of Mabel's Diner, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. The bikers who climbed off those machines looked like they had stepped out of every small town, nightmare leather jackets covered in patches that told stories of violence, territory, and criminal brotherhood, beards, tattoos, and attitudes that said they took what they wanted and hurt anyone who got in their way. The leader was a massive man who went by Tank, 6'4", with arms like tree trunks, and a face that had seen too many fights. He wore the colors of the Devil's Riders, a club known for drug trafficking, extortion, and leaving broken bones wherever they stopped. Tank pushed through the door of Mabel's Diner, followed by his crew. The little bell above the door chimed cheerfully as if welcoming any other customer. But the atmosphere in the diner immediately changed. Conversations stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths, and the comfortable morning routine froze Jenny, the waitress. A sweet girl in her 20s who had been working at Mabel since high school approached their table with nervous politeness. "Good morning, gentlemen. What can I get you?" Tank looked her up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl. "Coffee," he growled, "and whatever you got, that's free." "Free?" Jenny stammered. "I don't understand." Tank leaned back in the booth, his massive frame making the vinyl creak. "See, sweetie, we provide protection services for businesses in this area. Make sure nothing bad happens to nice places like this, and protection ain't free." The other customers in the diner shifted uncomfortably. Old farmer Bill Henderson reached for his wallet as if to leave, but Tank pointed a thick finger at him. "Sit down, Pops. Nobody leaves until we finish our business." From the kitchen, Earl could hear every word through the order window. He continued flipping pancakes, but his movements had changed, subtle differences that only someone with training would notice. His shoulders set differently, his weight shifted to the balls of his feet, his hands positioned near knives that could become weapons. Mabel herself emerged from the back office, a tiny woman who had run this diner for 40 years. She faced Tank with the kind of courage that came from dealing with difficult customers for decades. "We don't need any protection, thank you." Tank stood up, his full height towering over the elderly woman. "Oh, but you do," he said, placing a massive hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you don't understand how dangerous small towns can be. Fires happen, robberies happen, accidents happen to people who don't have the right kind of friends." The bikers laughed, and the sound carried menace that made everyone in the diner wish they were somewhere else, anywhere else. That's when Earl stepped out of the kitchen. Earl emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, moving with that same efficient precision he used when cooking. But now there was something different about him, something that made the air in the diner feel charged with tension. "Excuse me," Earl said, his voice calm but carrying authority that hadn't been there when he took breakfast orders. "There's no trouble here. These folks are just trying to eat." Tank turned to look at this small-town cook who had dared interrupt his shakedown. Well, he said with a grin that showed missing teeth. "Looks like the kitchen help wants to play hero." Earl didn't respond to the insult. He just stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, but positioned in a way that suggested he was ready for whatever came next. "You got something to say?" Cook Tank demanded, stepping closer, trying to use his size to intimidate Earl, looked up at the massive biker without flinching. "Just that you and your friends should probably finish your coffee and head on down the road." The laughter that erupted from the bikers was harsh and ugly. Tank grabbed Earl by the shirt, lifting him slightly off the ground. "You think you can tell us what to do, old man?" That's when everything changed. Earl moved with speed that defied logic. His hand shot up, striking Tank at a pressure point in the wrist that made the big man release his grip immediately. Then Earl pivoted, using Tank's own momentum to send him stumbling backward into his crew. The bikers scrambled to their feet, reaching for weapons, chains, knives, whatever they carried, but Earl was already moving. The first biker came at him with a chain. Earl caught it, wrapped it around his forearm, and used it to pull the man forward into a knee strike that dropped him instantly. The second biker tried to grab Earl from behind, but found himself face down on the checkerboard floor. Before he understood what had happened, Tank roared in fury and charged like an angry bull. Earl sidestepped, grabbed a coffee pot from the counter, and brought it down on Tank's head with precision that spoke of military training. The big man dropped like a sack of potatoes, coffee and ceramic everywhere. 3 more bikers rushed Earl simultaneously. This should have been the end of the small-town cook, but instead it became a demonstration of why you never underestimate quiet professionals. Earl moved through them like he was following choreographed steps he had practiced 10,000 times, using their own numbers against them, redirecting their attacks into each other, turning the confined space of the diner into a tactical advantage. A sugar dispenser became a weapon, a coffee mug became a projectile, the edge of a table became leverage for throws that sent grown men flying, chairs became shields, and the narrow aisle between booths became a choke point where Earl could face one attacker at a time. In less than 2 minutes, 12 hardened criminals lay groaning on the floor of Mabel's diner, defeated by a man they had dismissed as harmless. Earl stood in the middle of the chaos, breathing normally, adjusting his apron as if he had just finished preparing a large order. The diner was silent, except for the groaning of defeated bikers. Jenny stared at Earl with wide eyes, her mouth open in shock. Mabel sat down heavily in the nearest booth, fanning herself with a menu, and the other customers looked around as if they had just witnessed something impossible. Earl walked calmly to the phone behind the counter and dialed 911. "Yes, this is Earl Thompson at Mabel's Diner on Main Street. We need police and ambulances. We have 12 individuals who attempted armed robbery and assault. They're secured, but some may need medical attention." As sirens approached in the distance, the people in the diner found their voices. Earl Bill Henderson said, his voice shaky, "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Earl looked at the old farmer with those same calm eyes he had always had. Marine Force Recon 3 tours, Iraq, Afghanistan. "You were military," Jenny whispered. 22 years. Earl replied, then looked around at the faces staring at him. "I came here to retire, not to cause trouble." Mabel spoke up, her voice stronger. "Now, Earl Thompson, you just saved my diner. Maybe my life. Why didn't you ever tell us?" Earl shrugged. "Because it didn't matter. I was done with that life. I just wanted to cook eggs and mind my own business. But you kept training," Bill observed. "We seen you behind the diner practicing old habits." Earl said, "You never really stopped being what you were. You just hope you never have to use it again." When the police arrived, they found 12 bikers zip-tied with electrical cord that Earl had retrieved from the storage room. None of them were seriously injured, but all of them were conscious and very cooperative. The sheriff, a man named Dave Morton, who had known Earl for 15 years, took his statement and shook his head in amazement. "Earl, I had no idea. Most people don't." Earl said, "That's how I preferred it." The bikers were loaded into police vehicles, charged with attempted extortion, armed robbery, and assault. The Devil's Riders would be looking for new leadership, since Tank and his crew were heading to federal prison. As the last police car pulled away, the diner slowly returned to normal, but nothing would ever be quite the same. Word spread through Millfield faster than gossip usually did by evening. Everyone in town knew that Earl Thompson, the quiet cook at Mabel's, was actually a decorated Marine who had single-handedly defeated 12 armed bikers. The next morning, Earl arrived at work at his usual time, 5 a.m., to find a small crowd of townspeople waiting outside the diner. When he unlocked the door, Bill Henderson stepped forward. "Earl, we owe you an apology." For what Earl asked, genuinely confused. "For not seeing you properly all these years, for treating you like you were just the cook." "I am just the cook," Earl replied. But Bill shook his head. "No, sir, you're a lot more than that. You're the reason our town is safe. You're the reason Mabel can keep her diner. You're the reason we can all sleep better at night." Earl felt uncomfortable with the attention he had spent 15 years trying to blend in to be invisible. "I just did what needed doing." Over the following days, people treated Earl differently, not with fear but with respect. They said good morning instead of just nodding. They thanked him for their food. They asked about his military service. Though he remained modest about his experiences, Jenny started calling him Sergeant Earl, which made him smile despite himself. Mabel refused to let him pay for his own meals anymore and raised his salary without asking. The story spread beyond. Millfield reporters came asking for interviews. Earl politely declined, and he had no interest in being famous, but something had changed in Earl too. For 15 years he had been trying to forget who he used to be, trying to bury the warrior under the cook. But the events at the diner had reminded him that some things were worth fighting for. Small towns full of good people. Elderly women who built businesses with their own hands, young waitresses trying to make an honest living, the simple dignity of being able to eat breakfast in peace. 6 months later, Earl still works at Mabel's Diner. Still arrives at 5 a.m., still makes perfect eggs, and never gets an order wrong. But now when he moves through the kitchen, people understand what they're seeing. Precision earned through training. Grace learned under fire efficiency that comes from knowing every second might matter. The bikers never came back. Word had spread through criminal networks that Millfield was protected by someone who made their breakfast look easy and their threats look foolish. Earl Thompson found peace not by forgetting who he was, but by remembering that warriors protect, and sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in small-town diners where good people just want to live their lives. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one making your pancakes. Sometimes a warrior hangs up his uniform but never stops serving. And sometimes the best protection comes from someone who just wants to be left alone to do honest work. Have you ever met someone who seemed ordinary until circumstances revealed their extraordinary nature? Share their story in the comments. Because heroes walk among us every day, usually wearing aprons instead of armor. Subscribe to the Human Stories. For more tales of quiet courage, everyday heroes, and the warriors who never really retire, they just find new ways to serve. Because sometimes the most important battles happen over breakfast.